the 19th of November 2023, the curtain fell for a fundamental part of the workings on the Dutch National Rail network. What you have just witnessed was the last mainline train to be hauled by an NS-owned locomotive. Well, locomotives. It was also the last timetable train to be hauled by an NS Class 1700. They're a curious bunch, the 1700s. Introduced as a revised NS 1600, built especially to run push-pull services in the west of the country, 81 would be churned out to a relatively standard Alstom design between 1990 and 1994. But only 4 years after the final example entered service was the class made redundant on push-pull trains, as the carriages they pulled, the DDARs, received their own special motorised driving trailers. I actually have done a video on those driving trailers on those great locomotives, so it's the DDARs. I will make a card appear. When these 50 motor trailers appeared, the 1700s which became available for other traffic were used to replace the eldest locomotives on the network, the 1100s, 1200s, and the younger, but never fully utilised, 1300s. But even taking over the mostly passenger-oriented roles left by the other locomotives did not secure the 1700s work. As contemporary to the 1700s were the IRM units entering service in 1994. These distinctive double-decked multiple units showed NS the way forward. So much so that 46 new units were completed between 2002 and 2004, and at the same time the first units were revised and given extra carriages, in turn making them the VIRMs, or VIRMs. The units delivered as 3-car sets were upgraded to 4-car sets, and 4-car sets were upgraded to 6. In 2008, more VIRMs were ordered. Every batch delivered between 1994 and 2009, adding up to 178 units. Now, imagine the 101 locomotives across 3 classes, 1100, 1200 and 1300. All their passenger duties were now taken up by 1700s, the 50 DDARs, and on top of that, the 178 new modern double-decker units on top of the existing 1600s that already existed. In a country as small as the Netherlands. The country only had a population of 16.5 million in 2009, yet with a total route mileage only marginally more than Scotland. Something simply had to go. Now, if I can just stop the throwing of historical dates at you for 1 second. I might only be a young man, but I distinctly remember the IRMs being an oddity where I live, down south. Thinking of them as this strange, oddly shaped thing which had come down all the way from the Amsterdam region. I remember, if I wanted to go to any place of any significance, my train consisted out of carriages with openable windows hauled by a 1700. And as it simply goes with change, things change over time. The since reclassified VIRMs were getting more and more prominent here down south, as these 1700s were slowly phased out of most of the ordinary passenger work. But to a child, the 1700 was just gone one day. Of course, they hadn't simply gone, NS just found work for them elsewhere. In 2003, more driving trailers were delivered for work with the older ICR, the most modern intercity carriage stock. That's what IC stands for, intercity. And with these in tow, the 1700s were once again hauling push-pull trains on, for instance, the ISA line, the line between Roosendaal and Zwolle. Although the 1700s do not have a widely acknowledged nickname, unless you count the general body shape with a Nescassé nose, 27 1700s did carry actual names. They all carried names of towns with 2 or 3 larger cities thrown into the mix. Being locomotives, they could also be called upon when another train, multiple unit or not, had failed. But, as reflected in their farewell tour, the 1700s were completely associated with the Berlin Express in the late 2010s right up until their withdrawal. I actually saw one of these at the head of the Berlin Express, waiting at Amsterdam Central as I boarded the Eurostar for my trip to Scotland. At this point, only 8 remained in NS service, the other examples having either been sold off, or like the majority, gone for scrap, 2019 being the year of the cull for most 1700s.
And with the withdrawal of the 1700s, NS no longer owns their own mainline locomotives. The tracks and Vectron locos are both leased, and just painted and stickered in NS livery. To most people looking towards the Dutch network, the most typical sight would be a Verm, squeaky clean, hurrying through the fields with, if at all possible, a windmill in the background. But to me, it was a dirty 1700 at the helm of a rig of ICR coaches. They aren't completely gone, a few still remain for charter or civil engineering works. But I think I'm starting to understand how jarring it is to see something from your childhood and early teenage years suddenly confined to a museum.